Welcome to LPT Success Secrets. I'm your host, Diana. Let's go ahead and hop over to my screen so we can take a closer look.
Seller to pay that compensation either via direct payment of buyer's agent commission or via concessions. All right. So when a listing agent and a seller propose an amount of BAC to share, right, or to include in the price, or to be able to answer the phone and say, yes, we already have 2.5% included in our sales price, that is just the proposed buyer's agent commission.
Correct.
That does not mean that's the actual buyer's agent commission, because guess what? If you have a buyer's agent agreement at 1% and your buyer is unwilling to sign an amendment, then your compensation is only 1%, even though the seller proposed 2.5%. If you have a buyer agent agreement and it's at 3 and the seller proposed 2.5, you can ask for another 0.5% in concessions. You know, you could potentially use a lender credit to cover the other 0.5% from a lender. Your buyer could bring their own funds for that extra 0.5%. If there's excess seller concession towards closing costs and your lender is charging less. So again, it is very much proposed compensation. That is what the seller is proposing. And so what I really want you to understand is this idea of don't take a no from someone who can't give you a yes, right? The listing agent may know what the proposed amount was. The listing agent may know maybe the seller told him they weren't going to do this or do that. I saw a post recently where, and again, this may just be Facebook trolling, but they said, oh, the listing agent said they're keeping all 6% for themselves. They're not going to pay any buyer's agent commission. Now, I will promise you, if an offer comes in asking for buyer's agent commission, the seller is going to look at their agent and be like, wait. You want the 6 and you think I'm going to pay them 3? I mean, the listing agent does no longer have complete control over what you make. And so the idea here is do not take the no from someone who cannot give you a yes. So what I would say is even if a seller or even if a listing agent says, hey, my seller is unwilling to pay buyer's agent commission, I think you should still submit asking for it, right? Submit your compensation agreement with your offer. Again, certain states will allow you to put the compensation right in the contract. Other states require that the compensation be in a separate addendum to that contract. But again, go ask for it because you do not know what the seller is actually going to say yes or no to until they are presented with the offer. And so what I think there's this danger in guessing what they think the seller is going to do or what the seller wishes they could do or what the listing agent wishes the seller was going to do or thought the seller was going to do, just go in and ask for it. And so my recommendation is still show the house, submit the offer. If they are unwilling to give you the concessions needed for your buyer to be able to consummate the transaction, then the offer isn't going to be accepted. That happens to us all the time now. Imagine if you tried to pre-negotiate every contract before you showed a house, right? Think about how with a seller, before I show you this house, I just want to make sure, are you going to accept 2% under asking price for the offer with $5,000 in concessions and a 60-day close and a contingency on my house? Like, we don't try to get all of the details negotiated up front. So very much understand that this is no different. This is just part of the overall negotiation now. So I would encourage you to not get hung up on what the seller thinks they're going to pay or what the listing agent pre-negotiated, and still show the house. You have a signed buyer broker agreement to protect you, and then ask for that compensation as a part of the offer, and then let the seller tell you no.
That's right.
Because look, if they have multiple offers, maybe they do. If you're the only offer, they may say yes. I mean, this is how I would approach it. Now again, you're an entrepreneur. We're not setting hard, fast rules around this. We're not telling you can't ask in advance, right? We're not telling you have to ask in advance. I saw this, again, an agent told one of our agents, hey, I'm not allowed to show houses per my broker unless I have the amount of the proposed buyer's agent commission in writing. Like, that's insane to me.
That's crazy.
But again, these are things that are happening. We're going to get into the bad driver examples. But the important thing here is LPT is not dictating how you do business. We are sharing advice. My advice is to serve your clients at the highest level and make sure that you have as much opportunity as possible to continue doing your job. Do not let someone talk you out of showing a house with what could end up being misinformation, misconception, or maybe even just overzealousness, right? Like, no one knows how all this is going to play out. I would still show the house, and then just, again, when you put in the offer, you say, hey, we need an extra 3% in concessions, right? If the seller is bent out of shape on calling it commission, ask for it in the form of concessions. There's a lot of different ways to communicate this, and that's why we've had all these sessions, because we're really trying to walk you through all these different what ifs and the whys behind it and the psychology behind it. But the important thing to remember is do not take a no from someone who cannot give you a yes. And ultimately, the listing agent no longer decides what the seller is or is not willing to do. So if the listing agent says, we're not paying your commission, I would take that with a grain of salt. I would still submit the offer,
right.
and I would ask the seller to pay the commission, and then you're going to actually get the yes or no from the only person who has a right to say yes, which is the seller under the new settlement.
That's right.
Next slide. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Anything you want to add there, brother?
I just want to highlight something that you said, because it's so important, because you're right. You are calling the listing agent to ask something that they don't have the ability to say yes or no on, and people don't really understand that's what's happening. Hey, I want to make sure that your seller is doing X. Well, they don't have the ability to say what the seller is going to do, because there's nothing to talk about yet. There's no negotiations that have happened, right? The commission is negotiable. That's at the time of offer. So before you have something to negotiate, like, why are you talking about terms that don't matter, to your point? And so again, just really let that sink in, that when you're calling around asking, is the seller going to do X? You are prematurely asking a yes or no question to someone who has no bearing on what's going to happen there.
And real quick, something I just saw in the chat. So in the states where we can put the compensation in the contract, it's easy to say, like, hey, this contract is contingent upon the seller paying, the 3% as agreed to by the buyer's agent. In states where that is not allowed, I would use concessions, right? So I would say, hey, my offer is contingent upon the seller paying 6% in total concessions to my buyer, which in our mind is going to be maybe 3% for closing costs and then 3% for commission. And then when you include your additional compensation agreement, you will outline that the compensation requested in this agreement is already included in the 6% concession requested in the contract. So now your seller can't take the offer without taking the compensation, right? So again, you can't call it commission in the contract. We get that, but every state allows for seller concessions to be included in the contract. So include the amount of seller concessions total needed for both closing costs and commission. Don't call it commission, just call it concessions in the contract, and then have the supplemental agreement that explains, hey, 3% of that concession is going to cover this compensation agreement on behalf of my buyer, and that will fly in all 50 states. So again, you don't want to find yourself in a situation where a tricky seller says, hey, we think we're going to accept this but not accept that. Okay. And look, again, I will happily debate this with folks. If the buyer is paying the commission, a concession can be used for a buyer closing.
That's right.
I mean, in any state. And I know Texas folks maybe think that's not the case. I'm going to get our Texas attorneys on the phone. We're going to dig into this deeply. Again, it is not compensation from the seller to the buyer. It is the buyer paying the compensation to the agent, and then the seller giving a credit to the buyer, which the buyer can use for anything they want to use, including a fee they have agreed to pay to the buyer.
That's right.
All right.
That's correct.
So again, and look, even on VA loans, right? VA's changed. Like, I think we're actually in a really great place on this, but I understand there's some concerns around Texas. So Tracy, let's set up a meeting with Texas Legal Counsel and really go through this, because again, this is one I'll fight. I mean, we'll fight this, because again, we're not saying it is not a concession to pay commission directly to the agent. It is a concession to pay a cost that the buyer has previously agreed to, which is no different than closing costs, points, whatever.
Correct.
And so again, we're going to really dig into that, because I want our Texas agents to feel absolutely confident in how we're doing this. And I know that Texas has changed their contract. I see a great note there from Pam to allow for compensation. We're not talking about that. We're talking about concessions. All right. And again, using concessions to protect yourself is important. And these are the exact type of things we're digging into, because these are live and happening in real time. Because the way we envisioned all this a month ago, 2 months ago, has changed, right?
That's right.
Because we're seeing what's happening out in the field. We're seeing how other listing agents are reacting. We're seeing how buyers and buyers agents are reacting. So fantastic. All right, next slide. All right, so this is another concept we've talked about. And so what I want you to understand here, this little graph we made, on the left is the level of commitment requested, and then across the bottom is their perception of your position or influence. Now, that word perception is very important, all right? And so the idea here is, if you are asking for a lower level of commitment, like, hey, I'd like you to come meet me at a property, that's a very low level of commitment. So their perception of your position and influence as an agent doesn't have to be very high for them to meet you. Now, if you're asking for a 6-month exclusive buyer-broker agreement, you need a higher level of their perception of your position or influence. Now, what you don't know is you don't know what their perception is. You may walk into clients, and because of your marketing, because of your reputation, because of a referral from a friend, because of you've done business with them in the past, their perception of you may already be high enough that before you ever meet them in person, they're willing to sign a 6-month exclusive buyer-broker agreement, right? Other people who maybe are an internet lead or whatever, their perception of you may be lower to where asking for something like a 6-month exclusive BBA on the very first meeting may be tough. So why do we talk about this? And again, it's about their perception of you. And we have our own perception of ourselves, right? But your level of perception isn't what matters here. It's the potential client's perception of you. And so one of the things that you need to be aware of is as you are having conversations, and we did this in one of the role playing the other night, Norkeys and I did it on Friday night, you can go pull that recording up, is I was gauging her perception of me based on the conversation we were having, right? As she would come at me with an objection, I would then use that to understand what her perception of me was, right? And then respond accordingly. And every time I respond to her, my goal was to increase her perception of my influence, right? To position myself, to show her, hey, I am the expert. I do understand this at a very high level, and increase that up to try to get her to commit to me at a different level. Now, let's go to the next slide, Dave, because the important thing here is we are trying to meet the consumer where they are, right? And so it's where they are in their perception of me, which then determines how willing they are to commit to me at different levels. And so the concept that I went over that night in the role play with Norkeys is this idea of a multi-step buyer-broker agreement. All right, so come on back to us, Dave.
What day was that, real quick? Just
Friday night.
Friday night. Okay, so
Friday
8/16.
night, I think it was the 10 p.m.
The 10
7 p.m. or the 10 p.m. Friday night.
10 p.m.
Multi-step BBA. So what do I mean by this? All right, so let's say that I'm meeting Matt. He's going to be Norkeys today. He's going to be my buyer. And, I can tell that he is not ready to commit to me, right? Now, look, if I've sold Matt multiple houses, or Matt is my friend and I know Matt is going to work with me, then I would say, hey, man, look, before I show you this house, we're going to sign this buyer-broker agreement. It is 6 months. It is exclusive. You know I'm your guy. You know I work hard for you. We're not going to mess around with stepping our way up. We're just going to go ahead and sign the ultimate agreement because I know that Matt's perception of me based on past business is in a place for me to do that. Now, flip that around, and Matt is someone who is very analytical, has bought a lot of homes. I can tell that he is not ready to make a 6-month commitment to me, all right? So this is my recommendation. I'm going to ask Matt to sign a 1-day exclusive buyer-broker agreement, or a 1-day non-exclusive buyer-broker agreement, right? Or if it's available in my state, maybe a touring agreement, right? It doesn't matter what it is. We're just trying to lower the commitment. And a 1-day buyer-broker agreement is just as low a commitment as any type of touring form or whatever. But what I'm doing is I'm giving us a way together, Matt and I, to meet the requirements of the settlement, right? We have to have a written agreement outlining our compensation. So I'm going to say, look, Matt, I understand you're not ready to commit to me for 6 months. My goal is to earn that from you, though. I'm going to show you how amazing I am. I'm going to show you all the tools I have. I'm going to show you how hard I can work for you in trying to find you off-market properties and negotiate for you and all these things. So you're going to want to sign a 6-month commitment with me because you're going to want to make sure that I am all in on serving you. But right now, we're just going to go see this one house together. So all I'm going to ask you to sign right now is a 1-day agreement, right? Here's the buyer-broker agreement. We're going to have it expire at midnight tonight. We're going to have it expire tomorrow. Basically, all you're doing is committing to me that if you buy this particular house, this is the compensation I'm going to make. And now we're going to see that house tomorrow, and just know that I'm going to spend the next hour we're together making sure you understand why you should commit to me for the next 6 months. And when we leave this house, I'm going to understanding how to use these different tools, understanding the step up to say, hey, I'm going to start with a 1-day commitment, and then I'm going to go to a 3-month or 6-month commitment, right? This is how you move in. And if we go back to our graph, if I understand that his perception of my influence and position is not high enough yet, I'm going to ask for a lower commitment. And a great low commitment to say, hey man, I'm going to ask you to commit to me for 1 day. Right? I mean, think about how low of a commitment that is. And again, there's other ways to do this. Texas has a great touring agreement. On Friday, we're going to launch our pre-showing agreement. These are meant to be lower commitment agreements that still meet the requirement of the settlement. But you can do it right now today in Dotloop, right? Go into Dotloop, set it up for a 1-day commitment, ask Matt to sign it on his phone, on Dotloop, in the parking lot of the house, whatever. Hey man, yep, legally, before I show you this house, we got to have this signed. But all I'm going to ask you for right now is a 1-day commitment. Where again, if I know I have the influence with Matt, I'll ask him for the 6-month commitment right there. This is where you as a professional have to understand your consumers and meet them where they are.
That's right.
Okay? All right, so, and again, these are the types of things we are digging into in this week's classes. We got into it in the previous classes. We're going to really get tactical this week because we have a better understanding of where people are lacking. But again, this is the types of strategies. This was the Friday night role play. We talked about it again on Saturday morning. Everything I'm covering here is a highlight from last week's sessions. And then a lot of this is things we're going to dig into much deeper in the coming week. But again, this idea of the multi-step commitment, the multi-step buyer broker agreement, and there's lots of different forms to do it with. Every single state has a mechanism in .loop right now for you to do one property, multiple properties, 1 day, 6 months. All these things exist in different states. Understand how to use them. All right?
Perfect.
All right, next slide. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I absolutely love this quote from Mike Tyson because this really is what we've gone into here. And you can go ahead and throw up one more slide. Yep. And so what I mean by this is we have to watch out for bad drivers. We have to be ready to pivot. And there is no perfect roadmap. All right, so with that, you can come back to us. So one of the things that we really struggled with is originally we were going to just kind of say, hey, here's how we think this should work, right? Like, here's what you should do. Go get this form signed, then go get this form signed, right? And then whatever. And I know you guys are asking a lot of very detailed questions in the chat. A lot of this is state specific. So I will say the same thing I've said on almost all of these calls the last 2 weeks. Make sure you're on your state specific class. Ask these questions of your broker. I'm talking in national generalities. You can probably find an MLS or a state somewhere in the country that will make me wrong. Again, talk to your local brokers. Take your state specific classes. They can get into the exact forms and they can walk you through, hey, in our state, it can't be 6 months. It can only be 90 days. Hey, in our state, it can't be 1 day. It has to be 3. I don't know how much of that's the case, but I think the idea is soft commitment to hard commitment. Now go to your state class and make sure they walk you through the exact forms. Every single day we have state-specific classes. You can go into knowledge base, put in BBA. They're all there. We've been having those for 2 months now. We've ramped up the frequency the last 2 weeks. Those state-specific classes are irreplaceable. The high-level stuff we are doing as a part of the BBA Marathon is not a replacement for your state-level education because that's your state's forms, your state's rules, your state's individual guidelines. But I am pretty confident that these high-level strategies and tactics we're talking about can be adapted and used in every single state, maybe with some type of slight tweaking, okay? So this idea of getting punched in the mouth. So originally we were like, you know what? Let's give people the roadmap, right? We're just going to tell them what to do. Hey, go out there and get the 1 day signed and then get the 3 month or 6 month signed and then make sure you write this on here and make sure you write that on there. What we realized is there are so many different ways to do this that there is no straight line. There is no single roadmap that is going to work every single time because there are bad drivers. We are going to get punched in the mouth. You're going to do it exactly the right way, and some crazy listing agent is going to hit you with some nonsense that doesn't make sense, may not even be legal, but you still have to be ready to pivot and adapt because, look, the most important thing is making sure that our consumer gets the home, right? That we don't violate the guidelines, we don't break the law, we don't get fined, but beyond that, we're not trying to protect the listing agent from getting fined or getting sued if they're doing something wrong. We're trying to make sure that our buyer has the best chance to get the house or that our seller has the best chance of getting someone to go show their house. And so this is why we took this very fluid approach of saying, you know what, instead of teaching a single class where we try to give a roadmap that we know now is not going to work, right? It's like imagine your GPS if just constant roadblocks are being thrown at you every bit along the way. That is what this has turned into. And so because of the bad drivers, because of getting punched in the mouth, we are having these organic conversations 5 times a day to try to deal with all the little nuances, try to understand all those roadblocks, all those pivots. But the important thing for you to remember and understand is be flexible and be fluid and try to meet your customer where they are, right? You may have sellers that are like, hey, I absolutely want to offer buyer broker commission. Let's pre-negotiate it. I know it may be too much, I may be too little, but I would feel more comfortable having that because I want you to be able to say, yes, we're paying this. Other sellers may say, you know what? I think we should test the market. And if we only get asked for 1%, why would we pre-negotiate or why would we propose 3%, right? These different personalities are out there. And so while I think it is important for you to pick your lane and understand your intended path. Be ready for detours, be ready for roadblocks, be ready to get punched in the mouth, be ready for bad drivers, because all of that is happening right now.
And if you comment the word guide, I will send you the brand new LPT Guide PDF link. I hope to talk to you soon, and I'll see you next week. In the meanwhile, check out this video.